Hey team, and welcome back to the channel. So a lot of changes since the last time we were here, since our last video together. For our first video of 2025, we've got the new space, the new house, the move that happened. But we're all here, we're all ready, and we're all ready to talk about the magical elections that we have coming for this Aquarius New Moon, Gong Shifasai, for anyone who celebrates the Lunar New Year, of course, the year of the snake. Alas. So the configurations that we're working with for elections has actually been kind of rough this month. We've got Mars retrograde, we have Jupiter square Saturn, and we've got Mercury being combust for most of the period. So those three planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Mercury, are kind of out of the running insofar as like planets we can lean on to help kind of cement or anchor these elections. And that leaves us with fewer options. Obviously, the Sun, Saturn, Venus are really the three that we have to look to. We do have 6 electoral opportunities, though, to work with this month. Most of them are going to be lunar mansions, and we have one maybe fixed star that I'm going to present to you. It makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm going to like show it to you and kind of let you decide on your own how you feel about it. But we're going to go ahead and get started. But our first electoral opportunity is going to be for the 5th lunar mansion, and this one is primarily focused on the mind, on learning. Just Bubbles. Meow. Bubbles doesn't really care for this mansion. It's mostly focused on the mind, on learning, on understanding. And so we see the 5th lunar mansion utilized more for like the acquisition of knowledge. It can be very useful for students of any kind, anybody who's trying to learn like a new skill. Though it particularly isn't so much about like skills and handiwork, so much as it's about like knowledge and information. So kind of keep that in mind. It's good for when you need to like memorize or be able to call upon knowledge or have like the ability to answer questions or like to have questions answered. That's really more where the 5th lunar mansion shines. And it also has utilization for like dream work, for people who are trying to experience more like intentional dreaming, like lucid dreaming, or just like kind of different dream state experiences. The 5th lunar mansion is really good for. But taking a look at our chart, this is set for North America on February 5th at 11:26, a little bit before 11:30. And you'll want to keep this kind of mid-late Taurus rising. So we've got the moon on the ascendant in the 5th lunar mansion, and at this time she is applying this sextile to Venus here at the 1st degree of Aries. The moon will obviously have to go into like Cancer to do this, but we've got about a 9-ish degrees orb out between the moon and Venus. Venus is also the ruler of the 1st house, and Venus is not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. I'm going to go ahead and talk about this. Venus is, of course, conjoined the node. I don't really think that's a big issue with planets being conjoined nodes. The nodes are really more of an issue for like the sun and the moon, since that's where they experience their eclipses. So they're more obviously like debilitating or injurious to those bodies. But Venus doesn't really care so much about the node. And this is the north node, which tends to be a little bit more favorable for planets in many kind of readings or like interpretations of the nodes. So I don't really care so much about that. Something that you could do is back this time up actually to like a 17 degree. Let me see what time that is. Oh no, you can't do that. Okay. So I was going to say maybe if you get like 17 degrees of a Taurus on the ascendant, you get the square to the sun on the ascendant, and that would be a helpful kind of stabilizing factor, even if it's the square. But doing that would pull Venus into the 12th house, and I don't really like rulers of the 1st and the 12th. That's one of my kind of rules that I don't like. So let's just keep this time. It's unfortunate to kind of miss that, but is what you do. At least you'll have Jupiter in the 1st house, maybe depending on like depending on your latitude, to help keep the 1st house a little bit safer. But yeah, so that's the option for North America. For the Western European and Northern African version, this takes place on February 5th at 18:49, so just a little bit before 7 p.m. And here we have the moon now on the midheaven in that 5th lunar mansion and applying that sextile to Venus. This would have been really great if we get like an application of Mercury. The 5th lunar mansion is one of the ones that I think is like best. Is one of those mansions where like Saturn and Mercury really come forward as like the best choices. But, you know, Venus is the benefic planet who will help, I guess, though knowledge, learning isn't really her thing. And then we have the sun as the ruler of the 1st house here because we have Leo rising. The sun is here in Aquarius, which, you know, he's not super happy about, but he's not afflicted by Mars or Saturn, who he is averse to, which is our biggest concern. And the ascendant degree itself is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. So again, just kind of a generally positive setup. There are things that we could change to make it better, obviously, but this is what we have. And yeah, so if you've got a big test coming up, Western Europe, North Africa, here you go to help you get a little an edge on that, to help with that recall. And then the Australian version takes place on February 6th at 13:45, so just a little bit before 2 p.m. And here we've got, it looks very similar to the North American version, where you've got the moon on the ascendant in the fifth mansion, applying the sextile to Venus. But now you can see that that gap has closed up quite significantly. In the North American version, I think it was like 9 degrees apart, and now we're sitting at about 3, which is a much closer connection. Venus still with the node, and I've talked about that. I don't think it's a big deal for Venus, and if it was, it's the North Node, which tends to be read more positively in a lot of literature. Venus is unafflicted by Mars. We've got about 18 degrees from that square, which is great. Separating from Saturn, the ascendant degree is also safe. So yeah, all in all, just another kind of good setup for what we were looking for. Again, there are things that we could do better. There are things that we would like to do better. This one, because Venus is technically in the 10th house, kind of conjoined the cusp of the 11th. This is one that you could potentially back up to get like the sun square. Let me see what that would look like, because then Venus goes into the 11th, which is fine. But yeah, you could definitely do like a 13:11, like half an hour earlier, and this would get the sun square to the ascendant, which would be helpful and supportive, especially since the sun itself is kind of representative of like illumination, clarity, knowledge, information, which would be good. And this one you couldn't do it in the North American version because Venus was so close to the 12th house cusp, it would throw her in it. But Venus in the 11th is absolutely fine to use here. So, and then yeah, 17 degrees of Taurus is still unafflicted. It's kind of in like the sextiles of both the malefics, but that's fine. It's really the squares oppositions that we want to avoid. So there you go, kind of a neat little trick, Australia, to help kind of cement that election, make it a little bit better with that sun aspect to the ascendant. The next electional opportunity that we have is for the 6th lunar mansion, so just the next one down. And the 6th lunar mansion is one that we actually haven't seen in a while. And the 6th mansion is primarily utilized for relationships, for like romantic relationships, for love, for finding new relationships, for supporting relationships that currently exist. It's a great kind of coming together talisman. So really great to have if you are looking to, like I said, shore up a relationship that's already in existence, like an existing relationship that you just want to make a little bit stronger, you want to support better, or if you're currently looking for a partner. And the North American version of this takes place on February 6th at around 11:30, so it's very similar to, we have like almost the exact same ascendant degree as our last one. But here we have the moon in the first house conjoined Jupiter in the 6th mansion. And we wanted to keep the Venus ruled ascendant here because it would point us still to Venus here in Aries, who is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. And those are kind of our key things that we want to make sure the planet that rules the first house isn't afflicted by Mars or Saturn or like combust or anything like that. And that's the reason why we needed to keep the Taurus ascendant, why we needed to keep the Venus ruled ascendant. Because if we let it dip into Gemini, then we get with Mercury, who is combust to the sun right now, which is not useful at all. My big things for the rulers of the ascendant are, I don't like it when they're retrograde. I don't like it when they're in the 12th house. I don't like it when they're combust. I don't like it when they're afflicted by Mars or Saturn. Those are kind of my big things. There might be another one that I'm forgetting, but those are the big ones that I look out for. Insofar as like, no, this election can't work. This election is potentially more harmful than it can be helpful. And so that's why we had to make the call about Venus, who is going through a lot less than Mercury, who is undergoing this combustion with the sun, which is not going to be, it's not a great experience for somebody to go through. But the Jupiter connection here is very positive, very helpful, just because Jupiter as a greater benefic wants to provide like that stability and that support that relationships need. So is a really great planet to kind of lean on when we're looking for somebody like this. Unfortunately, Australia will not have an option for this 6th lunar mansion talisman, but Western Europe and North Africa will. And theirs, again, is going to look very similar to their 5th lunar mansion talisman. It's just like a day later, February 2nd at 1849. And here, kind of the same thing. We've got the moon in the 10th house, applying to the conjunction of Jupiter here. And very similar considerations as we had for the North American version, where the reason why we keep the late Leo ascendant is so we can lean on the sun as the ruler of the first house, and the sun is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, and can't be combust, can't be retrograde. The sun's a good pick the sun and the moon are both good picks because they have unique advantages to where they cannot suffer specific conditions that other planets can. But we have the sun here. He can't be combust. He can't be retrograde. He's not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. He's not in the 12th house. So that kind of saves a lot of issues. But if we had allowed the ascendant to go into Virgo, then we're looking back at then we're looking back at Mercury, who again is combust and is unusable. So that's why we need to kind of maintain this late Leo ascendant. And, similarly, the ascendant's not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. So that's just kind of like our safe spot to be in right now, leaning on the sun instead of Mercury, who is undergoing combustion. As Mercury leaves combustion, we'll see more options for, leaning on Mercury open up, but not this month because even with Mercury free, we didn't see a lot of the very useful waning mansions open up for us during this time period. So it is what it is. But like I said, Australia will not have an option for the 6th lunar mansion, and we can talk about that. The biggest issue for Australia and its 6th lunar mansion is that the moon is already separated from Jupiter, as you can see. And then after this, the moon applies the square to Saturn, which is not good. So that's our big issue with the moon, or with the 6th lunar mansion with Australia. And if we have backed it up to get like the moon in the 3rd house, which would be kind of our next best option, we could get the moon in the 3rd house, which would give us, we would get that the conjunction with Jupiter applying, which would be good. That would solve a problem. But we would introduce another problem of like the ruler of the 1st house is now Mars, who's retrograde, which I don't like. Or you would have an issue where like now I'm kind of wondering if maybe this chart wouldn't be fine. I think initially I didn't like this chart because that's the wrong button. I think initially I didn't like this chart, or the chart didn't dawn on me because Jupiter's so slow as the ruler of the 1st house, but that's actually not a terrible thing. I mean, it's not the best thing. It's not a terrible thing. But you would have the moon conjoin Jupiter. The moon would be still 9 degrees out from the square of Saturn and have to go through the conjunction of Jupiter first, which I think is fine. And you would even get Venus in the 1st house, which I think would be very strong for a talisman that focuses on relationships. So I think that actually could be really good. And then you'd have Jupiter as the ruler of the 1st house, that's the issue. I think Jupiter's probably a little too close to the square of Saturn for it to be a good choice. I usually do, this is actually, 4 and 4. So I do Jupiter's orb plus Saturn's orb equals their moiety, 8 degrees. So like aspects within 8 degrees, Saturn and Jupiter I think count. So that's like right on the line. I'm just going to leave it to you, is what I'm going to say. Australia. February 7th at 9:09, maybe. It depends on how you feel about Saturn. It depends on how you feel about the Saturn-Jupiter square. If you think it's too close, don't do it. If you think, you know what, let's go for it. What's the worst that could happen? Venus is in the ascendant. Go for it. Let me know how it goes. So Australia, the next opportunity was going to be an Australian exclusive for the 8th lunar mansion. And the 8th lunar mansion is one that is primarily focused on victory. And that's something that I'm going to kind of leave up to you. There are a lot of different ways you can be victorious over somebody, whether that's like a contest, a campaign, a lawsuit, a job, getting a job over other people, kind of that thing, getting chosen for a job over other people. Which I think can make the 8th lunar mansion very helpful. And the 8th lunar mansion, honestly, has been one that I've been really looking forward to having a really great opportunity for a long time. I still haven't found it. But Australia, this might be able to help you out a little bit. And we pulled out a lot of stops to make this work, is what I'm going to say. So here we're going to have the moon in the 11th house in the 8th lunar mansion. And the 11th house is sort of like, typically we want the moon here in the 1st, in the 10th, or the 11th or the 3rd. And those are usually the only 3 houses that I consider lunar mansions for. There's another house that I use personally, but I don't recommend to other people. It's a secret. It's not. It's the 4th house. It's a controversial one, but I like to use it if I need to. So the 11th is a little bit lower on our priority list. Typically we want the 1st or the 10th house, but the 11th works just fine. It's another really good house to lean into. The moon likes it here. But here we're going to have the moon in the 11th house in the 8th lunar mansion, and at this time she's applying this square to Venus here in Aries. She'll have to cross over, of course, into Cancer to complete this square. That's not a big deal. Venus is a benefic planet. She wants to bring good things to people. She's not what I would call competitive necessarily, you know what I mean? The eighth lunar mansion, I think, is one that Mars operates very well for as kind of the partner planet for this. Mars, the Sun, even Jupiter, really good. Saturn sometimes, sleeper, like that's a sleeper one, Saturn. So Venus, a benefic planet, wants to help, wants to produce good things. Victory is a good thing. That's kind of the logic we're using here. The Sun is the ruler of the first house here at 19 degrees Aquarius, unafflicted by Saturn or Mars. The Moon's not afflicted by Saturn or Mars. She's separated from the square of Saturn by 10 degrees, which I think is good. And yeah, so that's kind of it. That's the main thing. I also kind of like that Venus rules the 10th house in the election chart. I think that's kind of fun. I don't usually look at house rulerships that closely, but it's fun when it lines up. But yeah, so that's sort of your eighth lunar mansion opportunity. Look into it. I would really, really like to get a opportunity that like really sings as like this is a really great one. But we still wait for a while. And then it's going to close up soon. This opportunity is going to close up as Saturn moves more through Pisces and starts to cast a square aspect into this lunar mansion. Even more so than it does now, but at least the moon has a lot of room within the mansion to be separating from Saturn, but that's going to get smaller and smaller until it's no longer useful. So we might have to wait until Saturn, moves into like mid-Aries before we really start to see a good 8th lunar mansion opportunities open up. Also, a reminder, though I talked about this in my planetary talismans kind of year ahead thing, so please go see that video if you haven't seen it yet, to kind of help you plan out more. February 8th at 1349 is roughly the time period that Western Europe and North Africa will have an opportunity for a Moon in Cancer planetary talisman, a waxing Moon in Cancer planetary talisman. As you can see here, the Moon is freshly into Cancer on the ascendant with Cancer rising, and she's applying a square aspect to Venus here. That's fine. One of the big things that you want with the Moon talisman is you want the Moon to be in the proper phase, generally waxing. Most people want waxing Moon talismans. They want to be able to gain or augment or increase things. Waning Moon talismans have kind of their own unique purposes. You want the Moon to be unafflicted, which she is, not afflicted by Mars, who's much deeper into the sign, not afflicted by Saturn. And you want the Moon to apply to a benefic planet or a planet that helps out a little bit. And so for Moon talismans, typically I would only look for Jupiter, Venus, and the Sun to help here, maybe Mercury. But those are the three that I would be like, yes, those are the partner planets that you want. So that's that opportunity. That's my reminder of that opportunity for you all, Western Europe, North Africa. For those who are just now hearing about this, like I said, please go check out my video about the planetary elections year ahead. I'll drop in reminders of them, of course, as they come up. I'm still searching through to make sure I haven't missed any from that. But please go and get that so you can be more aware of them before they just kind of pop up on you. The next electional opportunity is one that everybody in the world should be able to get, depending on a few factors that may make it more viable in some places than others. But this is going to be for a 10th lunar mansion talisman. And the 10th lunar mansion is one of my absolute favorite mansions. It's one that is primarily focused on the development and maintenance of good health. So it is very much more in the camp of like preventative medicine for helping you to regain strength. So if you want to be more constitutionally fortified moving forward, if you want to be, healthier, if it's your goal to be healthier in whatever way, the 10th lunar mansion is very, very helpful. I've also noticed it a lot with clients, as the 10th lunar mansion has kind of a profound impact on the physician. And this can be really important for people who are looking for a new doctor or are struggling to kind of communicate with doctors. In that I've seen kind of time and time again that the 10th lunar mansion puts the right doctor in the right place to get the person the help that they need, which I think is so infinitely valuable in today, especially as healthcare becomes increasingly difficult to get for people thanks to political choices, is what I'm going to say. But anyway, the 10th lunar mansion, very nice. For the North American continent, this is going to take place on February 10th at just around 4 p.m., 1600. And here we're going to have the Moon on the ascendant in Leo, and she's going to be applying a very close trine to Venus here in Aries. So again, when we're talking about like planets that the Moon should apply to, the 10th lunar mansion is about health. So we want planets that are able to produce health in some fashion. The Sun is not going to be a big one for that one. Jupiter is probably our number 2. And then Venus as a benefic planet is going to be our 3rd option here. So having a trine to Venus, who is a benefic planet, who wants to stabilize, who wants to help, who wants to kind of produce that goodness is going to get us there. So it would have been nice to see, like, ideally, a version of the 10th lunar mansion that sees a more powerful connection to a well-placed sun, a more powerful connection to a well-placed Jupiter. But as you can see, like, none of the planets are actually doing that well right now. Like, right? So it's like, let's start from the top. Mercury's combust. The moon, she's doing fine. The sun, detriment in Aquarius. Venus, detriment in Aries. Jupiter, detriment in Gemini. Saturn, he's hanging in there. Mars, fall in Cancer, retrograde. Nobody's having a good time. Nobody's having a good time right now. And doesn't it feel like it? Doesn't it feel like it, right? So there's some issues, but this is definitely kind of the best, kind of an eye in the storm, like kind of the best, making the best of what you have situation. So this would be a good 10th lunar mansion talisman to have to kind of get you through. But I would definitely keep an eye out for more more positive ones, more stronger connection ones. I'm hoping that we'll get a good option with when the sun moves into Aries, or even at the end of Pisces, honestly. But we'll see. It'll depend a lot on what Saturn has to do, on what Saturn's up to, how Saturn wants to get involved. The Western Europe and Northern African version of this chart looks very similar, just with one key difference, and that is that the moon is in a different sign. So we've got the moon. This takes place, on February 10th at 1546. And here we have the moon in Cancer in the 10th lunar mansion with the Cancer ascendant. And she is also applying this trine to Venus. It's a little bit further out. And the moon needs to change signs for it to complete, but that's fine. But yeah, kind of the same things that we talked about before. We've got the Cancer ascendant, which is unafflicted by Mars, who is now over 10 degrees away from it. The moon as well is 10 degrees separated from it, which is good. And that's really our main focus, because the moon rules the ascendant, and we still maintain that trine with Venus, who now in this chart is on the midheaven, which is good. Kind of an additional little punch of power for Venus here to help kind of carry us through. But again, some of those same, I'm not going to call them issues, but like less ideal placements are in play. None of the planets are really doing particularly well. Hopefully we'll see a nice 10th mansion opportunity kick up as we move into spring, but that kind of remains to be seen. So the Australian version of this chart I actually liked a lot. February 11th at 1812, Australia has a really kind of fun 10th lunar mansion opportunity. So the moon is at the very end of the 10th lunar mansion in this chart. I think the 10th lunar mansion ends at 8 degrees Leo in 35 minutes. So be mindful of that working with it. That's why we backed the moon up off the ascendant, to give you a little bit more time to work on it. So our big thing here is we've got the moon in the 10th lunar mansion. Hold on. So we've got the moon in the 10th lunar mansion in the ascendant. And at this point, she is now not applying the trine to Venus like she was before, but separating from that and applying the sextile to Jupiter. This is a venerated moon. So veneration is, you've probably mostly heard of, let me get my camera right. You probably mostly heard of like besiegement, when the moon is like caught between the aspects of two difficult planets, usually like the square of Mars to the conjunction of Saturn or something like that. Veneration is kind of the inverse of that, where the moon is instead caught between the helpful aspects of two benefic planets, like the trine of Venus and the sextile of Jupiter. It's a very powerfully kind of supportive and protective position for the moon to be in, or any planet really, but the moon here, since she's the one that we're talking about. So definitely take advantage of this at all in like Australia. This is a really nice moment in time for the moon, especially since she's like caught with these two planets who are benefics, with kind of everything that we talked about going on, with like nobody really being situated very well in the charts. Sometimes it's just that way. Your friend's helping you out the best they can. And that's what kind of the moon's going through. But then we go back. The sun is the ruler of the first house here, and the sun's doing fine. He's not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. The moon's not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. The ascendant's not afflicted by Mars or Saturn. But this should give you enough time, Australia, to do something before the moon switches out of the 10th lunar mansion, which happens about like 45 minutes-ish after this. So that should give you enough time to do what you need to do. So our next selection opportunity is going to be in a Western Europe and North Africa exclusive, and it's going to be for the 11th Lunar Mansion. And the 11th Lunar Mansion is one that is primarily focused on like the workplace, on like climbing the corporate ladder, on promotions. It's kind of its powers are sort of like this sort of unique combination of like assistance from authority and making more money. So like promotions, getting jobs, that kind of thing is much more kind of where it's not like the textual interpretation of the 11th Lunar Mansion, but it makes a lot of sense given kind of like the two powers that the 11th Mansion is described as having. Like this would be a good way to utilize it. So I think of the 11th Lunar Mansion mostly as one that we use when we're trying to get a promotion, when we're trying to negotiate better contracts for ourselves, when we're trying to even it can be used more for self-employment as well if you're trying to do that, but then that is more about like branding. So it's kind of got a bit more of a limited usage. But especially if you're going for like a big promotion or trying to get a different job or something like that, the 11th Lunar Mansion can be very helpful to get you there. And this chart's going to look a little bit different. It takes place on February 11th at 13:29, so a little bit like 1:30 p.m. basically. And we're going to have the moon in freshly into the 11th Lunar Mansion. The moon rules the ascendant, and we're taking that same concept from the Australian 10th Lunar Mansion with the veneration of the moon, to see the moon is separating from the trine of Venus and applying to that sextile of Jupiter. So that's kind of the theme that we're maintaining. We're trying to make the moon as like powerful, as positive of a force here as we possibly can, and there's really no better that we can do at this moment in time than having her venerated like this, especially now as the ruler of the first house, which is a nice little addition. And yeah, these are two benefic planets that are going to do their best to support and uplift the moon, and sometimes that's what you need when you're getting, when you're trying to go through this the gauntlet of job hunting or promotion acquiring, we'll call it. So that was all. Our last selection opportunity is kind of the one that I mentioned before, where I was like, maybe not. I'm going to offer it up to you guys and see kind of how you feel about it. If you want to go forward with it, awesome. If you don't, that's totally fine. But it is going to be an opportunity for an Arcturus fixed star talisman. Arcturus is another star that's heavily associated with like health. The texts talk about Arcturus as being primarily like for blood health, for the health of the blood. And so it's very easy kind of in our modern minds to think of Arcturus as only for like blood diseases or things like that. You kind of have to take a step back from it, because in the Greek medical model, where the astrology is leaning very heavily on and developed with, the health of the blood is responsible for your overall health and constitution and your condition. If your blood is made out of gross materials, if your blood is made out of like an imbalance of the four humors, you're going to be more sickly in a particular way. So having a healthy, well-balanced blood isn't just like you don't have a blood disease. It's like you generally radiate health. So for Arcturus, I think it's important to remember that it is just a very nice, very good health-acquiring star, healthy, healing star. So that's what we want. We look forward to that. So we've got the moon here applying to the... Okay. So Arcturus is a star that's at 24 degrees of Libra. So we need to make sure that we have 24 degrees of Libra either on the ascendant or the midheaven. We have that on the midheaven here. The moon is applying the conjunction to this star, and at the time she's applying a trine to the sun. So Arcturus is a star that is of the nature of Jupiter and of Mars. Typically, that's the star. Those are the two planets that you would want to apply, that you would want the moon to apply to. I'm offering the sun as an alternative because the sun is also about health. He's also about unconditional, glowing, radiating health in a way that I think mimics very well or complements very well Arcturus's power. So that's my first maybe. My second maybe is that the moon is about 5-ish degrees separated from the square of Mars. And that's my main maybe. So we haven't had a really good fixed star option for Arcturus for a long time. And we're kind of in a dearth of fixed star talisman elections anyway. So I wanted to offer this one as a potentiality. Typically, I use the moon's orb plus Mars's and that's the moiety that I give them, about 10 degrees. So we're well within that for me. But if you're an individual who's fine with this square, it is mutually separating, right? Like Mars is backing up away from the moon, and the moon is moving forward away from Mars. And if you're fine with a 5-degree orb, then maybe this is an option that you want to pick up and give a shot. I would really recommend the 10th Lunar Mansion instead. That one is generally much more like checks all of our boxes, a little less unconventional. But the ruler of the first house in this one is Saturn here, which is fine. Saturn's not afflicted by the sun. He's in a trine aspect with Mars, which is not a square, so it's fine. But this is the kind of North American option, February 17th at around 3:45 in the morning, that I would offer as a maybe for those of you who are potentially interested in giving it a shot and seeing what it is. I'm not a huge super fan of it for the reasons I listed, but it is a thing to try out and experiment with and see how you like it. But all right, everybody, those were all the election opportunities that I had to share with you for this month. Hopefully, as we move forward more into the year and the planet's conditions improve, we'll be able to start to see a lot more kind of open up for us. But this didn't have a terrible batch, just that the planets involved weren't as super oompful. Oompful is the new adverb that we're going to use for... Or is oompful an adjective? Who knows? But that's the... So they were a lot less impactful, they had a lot less oomph and power behind them, but we do have some options here for us to pick up and utilize through this winter to get us through to spring, where we might start to see some of those planetary conditions improve. But thank you all for being here, and I will see you guys next time on our Pisces New Moon.